So it seems to me that the DMO, as it is today, exists simply to rationalize political decisions about borrowing and try to explain it away. For example, they keep telling us about debt to GDP, but they don't tell you about revenue to debt service ratio, which is the real issue. So that's why I said that the DMO doesn't seem to be able to influence the discussion in a way that is actually to the best interest of Nigerians. But we do have a DMO, and there are processes through which these loans are negotiated and through which they go. One, they will not be signed if the Attorney General of the Federation has not reviewed the loan. So I don't think we should feel that people just go and sign anything. So the question then is, if the Attorney General agrees to things we don't agree with, how do we hold the Attorney General accountable? But because you see, there's no transparency in these negotiations, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what the Attorney General has seen. We don't know what he has signed. We don't know what comment he has made. And of course, there can be no external borrowing without the approval of the National Assembly. So these are the two checks. But does the National Assembly take these decisions based on politics or based on economics? Well, the answer is blowing in the wind. So this is the question. That's my answer to the question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We thank you very much, Prof. We take another question immediately from Afiz Adebayo, please. Afiz, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good evening, Mr. Dan.
Good evening.
I want to greet our respected Prof. Dr. Magalu. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening, all participants. Now, my question is straightforward, is relating to the loan. Now, Prof, looking at the content of the contract, okay, the clause in particular that we share stipulates that Nigeria is conceding or ceding its sovereignty to the Republic of China should there be default relating to the project. Okay. Now, as an expert, is there a reason for Nigerians to be concerned? That is one.
Okay.
Then secondly, I want to ask Prof, if you are in charge of the affair of this nation, relating to this contract, what will you do differently and how will you do it to the best interest of Nigeria and Nigerians? Thank you, sir.
Well, first of all, that's a hypothetical, but let me answer the question. If I were to be the one, deciding on these things, first of all, I would not go for those loans. I would reform the revenue system in Nigeria to give the federal government enough revenue in taxes, and there's so many unexploited possibilities. Even when we look at the question of taxation, you don't have to raise or increase taxes, but you can diversify your tax base. I have said it time and again, if you do an audit of the mobile telephone network in Nigeria, you will reach practically everybody. If you do a phone audit, you will know who owns what line, what their employment is, and whether that employment is taxable. You will bring a lot of people from the informal economy into the formal economy. Even if it's a small thing you're getting from them by tax, if you multiply it according to millions, there are at least 160 million mobile phone lines in Nigeria today. That's a fact. There are about 70 million people that we know should be paying tax. Only 10 million of them are. So you see, there's a huge gap that we can go to and get, even if it's 10, or 100, whatever it is. If you multiply that, the revenue from there is huge. So that would be my approach if I were to be. I would not be just looking for where to borrow money. No, I'll be looking for how to create wealth for the nation internally. So that's number one. Number two, if going beyond that, and I had to go into such a contract, I would negotiate it very differently. And the first thing I would insist on that contract, first of all, we would do a competitive bidding. I would not agree to borrowing money from you, and your company must be the one to do the job. That's gone beyond borrowing money. That is just trading your independence away. That's what it is. I would never get into a contract like that. So, and this is the problem that many African countries have with China. They are not able to assert themselves in negotiations with China. Let us say that I were to agree in any event that a Chinese company would build it. We will do a comparative cost analysis. We'll go to Ethiopia and other countries and check the costs. And I would not allow that all the supplies and all the labor and everything has to come from China. It means that there's no real benefit for my own country when people are looking for jobs. When people are looking for jobs. So it's a question of the mindsets you come to these discussions with. I think that's what matters. So I've taken you through a number of hypotheticals. One, would I even go, massively borrowing on behalf of Nigeria? No, I wouldn't, because I would apply my mind to what are the alternatives. Because I know that the implications of these endless loans for the people of Nigeria are not necessarily the best. So this is how I would look at it at various levels.
We thank you, Prof. We have less than 5 minutes remaining for this discussion. So I will call on Buje Daniel, please, to ask his question. If you quickly unmute yourself and ask your question. Buje Daniel, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, Daniel, for giving me the opportunity. Sir, as a young person, I'm very concerned about some of the things you raised. And maybe these are the confusions that our leaders are failing to tell our people. One of them is the debt service to revenue ratio. You are absolutely right, because last month, the Minister of Finance said the debt to ratio is 99%. But many Nigerians don't understand what it is. So what does it mean to have a good debt service to revenue ratio when taking loan? And sir, please explain why it is important that the principal, the interest, and a good accounting or auditing export revenue is important before you take a loan. I feel that when this is said, this will help us better understand. I clearly get your point, and I hope Nigerians are listening. Thank you, Hello Boss TV. This is a wonderful presentation, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think, if I got you correctly, on the question of revenue to debt service ratio, I explained it very simply. A revenue to debt service ratio of 99% means that if every 1 naira you earn, 99 kobo is going to servicing the loan, not even paying back the full loan, but mostly servicing the interest. So that's just not good. And I don't think it doesn't take rocket science to understand that this is not a good situation. The World Bank tells us, they're experts on these things, that the revenue to debt service ratio ideally should not be more than 22.5% for any country. So it's not a very good idea to be paying more than 1/4 of any 1 naira you're earning servicing debt. So number two, before you borrow, you have to look at the purpose for which you're borrowing and the economic viability. There is no thorough exercise I know that takes place in Nigeria assessing the economic viability and revenue potential of projects for foreign loans. We have even seen that some of the foreign loans, $500 million, that are being proposed to digitize NTA and these types of things, So you have to question about the economic viability. And that's why I say that we all need infrastructure. Everybody knows. But why don't you use the PPP approach instead of borrowing for every dollar you want? Nigeria is a huge country with 200 million people. Everybody knows it's a great market. If the enabling conditions were to be created, a lot of investors would come into that country, they will make money, but we too will get the benefit. You see what I'm saying? So it's not a country of 500,000 people that investors have to worry. If I come and invest there, how do I get my money back? No. So it's a question of the political will of the government. It's a question of the competence of economic management, which determines the approach. But everything in Nigeria is managed from the basis of politics. There's very little rational thinking that goes into many of these decisions. They have decided mainly on politics. And while we're on politics, let me say something. It is very interesting that virtually all of these projects are in 2 parts of the country or 3 parts of the country. There is little or no project in the southeast of Nigeria from these loans. Does it mean that the people of the southeast do not contribute any taxes to the federal government, which are being used to pay these loans? You know the answer. That's not true. They are being taxed. Can you have taxation without representation? Wasn't that what led to the Boston Tea Party and the revolution in America? So this is the thing. So everything is just about politics. And even when you're doing the politics, it's done in a certain way that is a bit skewed and creates more political problems. But the more important thing for me, from an economic point of view, is the economic viability of the projects and the economics of it all. The economics of it all is just not right to me. But the politicians are our masters. So.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. We are gradually coming to the end of this conversation. So what we can do now is simply to take all the questions at once, and then you use it to give your concluding comments, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So let's call on Bashir Medugu, please. Bashir, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Bashir. Bashir Medugu, are you here? Can you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question? Okay.
Good evening, Prof. Yes, I am. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hear me? Hello, Bashir. How are you?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Bashir. Hello,
Maybe
Bashir, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, good. I can see him.
Yes, I want to find out the sovereignty clause in the Chinese agreement. Vis-a-vis international law, you know.
Okay.
And the concept of non-intervention, and even though Chinese and the Nigerians have, entered into an agreement, I think those international agreements shall be able to subsist rather than the sovereignty clause that is inserted in the contract. I want to find out what is the relationship. Does it supersede the international agreements or the international concept of sovereignty of countries? That is my question.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Let's also call on Bob Manuel Echongu, please. Bob Manuel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ilumba. And thank you, Professor, for your wonderful positions on these loan issues. My question is concerning the third-party witness issue in this loan arrangement with China. See that Hong Kong is an annex kind of China. What are the risks we face if we have to go to international arbitration concerning this loan? How does that play out in our favor or against us as Hong Kong being a third party in this loan arrangement? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Also, we call on Othman Esatuchuku, please. If you can unmute yourself, Othman.
Oh, good evening. Thank you very much, Daniel. I thank my boss and my role model, Prof, for having you this evening. My question is, Prof, looking at the trajectory of Nigerian borrowing, assuming without conceding we could not afford to repay this loan from China, what do you suggest or what do you advise the citizens of Nigeria to do in order to compel the government to stop borrowing us into perpetual poverty? Because sovereignty belongs to the people, and these guys does not even consult us. They don't give us any room, to suggest a way out for this country. So what do you suggest the citizens should do to compel the government to stop borrowing? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Ejiofor Ozago, please. Ejiofor Ozago, please. Lotanna's
Hello?
iPad. Okay,
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
Ejiofor, go ahead, please.
Yeah, okay. Prof, thank you very much for your inputs. My take is that it's not just commonsensical that a situation whereby in Nigeria, contract inflation is a norm, and even the projects that's been marked out for for this loan seems to be highly inflated. That the government should focus more energy in trying to curb down this inflation of contracts and other wastes, excesses like you mentioned. Instead of, is that not a way to go? As part of tackling corruption also, because to borrow money for a project that's already hyper-inflected, it doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Lotanna, you have Lotanna's iPad, please. Are you able to ask your question quickly, please?
Hi, everyone. So my question is this. Prof, you had listed about 3 points or 3 ways you could approach this issue if you were to be the president of Nigeria, where you mentioned the PPP and all those points. Now, my question is, when you have just 4 years to do this and also prove a point for your re-election, because what usually happens is that the first 2 years is usually the one for, settling the political allies and everything. And by the time they are done settling the political allies, they have another 2 years to prepare for the next term. So what time do you...
I'll go join her later.
What time will you have to prepare for these things and also prove a point for your re-election? Because that's the realistic thing that we usually face in politics today.
Right. Casey Mora, please. Quickly, if we can have your questions quickly. Casey
okay,
Mora.
Prof. Casey here. Thank you so much for this. Yeah, my quick question is, given the quagmire that the nation is in now, we know that the economic viability of Nigeria, even the political viability, if we continue on this trajectory, doesn't seem very good. What do you think would help? What can the National Assembly do? What can this current government do to reverse some of these trends and help get Nigeria back on track?
We thank you. Obio Suji, please. Obio Suji. Obio Suji, please.
Yes, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, just a very basic question. Prof did say that what he's more concerned about is economic viability of loans, and that basically the capacity of such loans or the projects being attributed tied to those loans being able to be paid back. So I'm asking a very basic question. Prof, do you think that given the respective loans we've taken so far, do they appear economically viable indeed to repay, for these loans to be repaid? Or are we going to be looking out for other sources to repay those loans and not from the project itself?
Well, thank you. Philip, please. Philip.
Yeah, hello, I'm here. Thank you very much. Prof, thank you for the lecture. Prof, in the opening statement, you made mention that borrowing from China vis-a-vis the West is like moving from frying pan to fire. And I think in the course of the lecture, you really explained why no transparency, and most of the loans taken from China is more or less financing Chinese assets or Chinese exports rather. And then in the long analysis, it's like we the borrower is actually doing China more favor than thought to be done by the loans being borrowed. But my question is this: is a known fact that in some countries that defaulted in the Chinese loans, Sri Lanka, Zambia, and some others, China or Chinese government in one way or the other have tried to seize the finance assets. In Nigeria's case, who says they can't do that here also if Nigeria defaults in the loan repayments? And then judging from the fact that we're spending already 99% of our revenues in servicing debts, not even the debt itself. 20 years term loan from China, the tenor is running. So who says they cannot equally seize the assets on coming here and do what they've done to the other countries to Nigeria? Thank you.
We thank you very much. We normally insist that those who will join us will enter with their names. But in the spirit of courtesy, let's allow Galaxy A70 to ask questions. Galaxy A70, please, and Hawaii Prime 2009, please get ready.
All right. Good afternoon, my brother. My name is Mr. Irele, and I'm calling from Aberdeen. Prof, thank you so much. I mean, you've done a wonderful presentation today, and what you said clearly state the situation we are in Nigeria. It's not a doubt that those loans were actually borrowed not for the interest of Nigeria or Nigerians, but for the same corrupt practices. And again, when you check the characteristics of a failed state, these things happening in Nigeria defines what a failed state is. Unemployment, the ratios to submitting debt and stuff like that. So I want you, without shying away from the truth, to tell us if actually you support the view that Nigeria is actually a failed state based on all this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last question, please, will come from Hawaii Y9 Prime 2009. Please quickly ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul. I'm calling from the Middle East. I work in the oil industry. And Prof said something about PPP, which I absolutely agree with him. The telecom industry in Nigeria is a typical example of the PPP. So what is his view in extending the full deregulation of telecom into the downstream of the oil and gas industry? Because that has been a big problem. Secondly, he also said that the recurring expenditure is one of the big problems in government. So it means that government is basically too large. So what is his view on switching from the bogus and expensive presidential style of government to the much more smaller parliamentary system of government, which is smaller, less expensive, and less corrupt? The kind of system that is practiced in the United Kingdom, where I'm based into. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. You are. Let's see how much justice you'll be able to do to those questions before we round up.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions, and I'll just try and give very short one-line answers.
Yes.
Starting with the sovereignty clause. Every country has sovereignty in international law. That is one of the attributes of statehood. That is why you can send ambassadors and receive ambassadors, and you can have diplomatic immunities because you represent a sovereign if you're an ambassador, and so on and so forth. Now, but in reality, I find in international law, and I'm an international lawyer in addition to being a political economist, I have found that there are sovereigns with a small s, and there are sovereigns with a capital S. So sovereigns are not equal in the international system. And because some countries have the indices of power, they have the economic strength, they have technology, and they have military strength, they are far more able to protect their sovereignty than smaller countries. If, for example, a small country has a permanent mission at the UN in New York, where I used to work, but cannot pay its rent, and its rent is being paid by some big country, can you seriously assert your sovereignty to that country? If you're dependent on foreign aid, can you seriously assert your sovereignty to the country that you depend on for aid? So let me just say that the sovereignty of many African countries is seriously qualified, even by the realities of the international system today. Second, you can, by your own contractual actions, derogate from your sovereignty. It is your decision. Either you have made it willingly or you have been coerced into doing so, or you have been conned into doing so. Whichever one it is, we don't know. So for example, if you look at this agreement, it's not a direct ceding of Nigeria's assets. But as I have told you, it is normal in contracts that there will be provisions for some sort of dispute resolution in case a dispute arises. And because foreign investors don't trust the Nigerian judicial system, they tend to go for international arbitrations. Now, you could negotiate that clause, and there could be, and whatever arbitral award that the arbitration rules on, you're bound to pay it because you entered into the contract. But is it necessary for you to agree that an arbitration award could be an attachment on your assets, with only 2 or 3 exceptions, maybe military assets? That means that if the arbitration rules in the favor of China, either directly that you have to pay a certain sum and you cannot pay that sum, they can come in and take those assets. Or the arbitration can rule that you should give up those assets. So you have signed it in the contract. So it's a kind of, is a waiver of sovereign immunity, an express waiver, actually. So that's my answer to Bashir. There are different ways that this contract could have been negotiated without violating the basic principle that the Chinese are entitled to judicial recourse if something goes wrong. It's a contract. So you can't say, I'll take a loan and there's nothing I should be prepared to give up if I can't pay my loan. You cannot take that position. So this is the balance of positions. And I hope I have tried to address your question. Now, somebody said, somebody talked about Hong Kong. I'm not very clear. I don't remember the details of that, but you said they're a third party, but a third party is normally not a party to the contract, but it could be a third party beneficiary of the contract. So, but I'm not very sure of the details of what you are referring to, but we all know the relationship between Hong Kong and China. Hong Kong is a special territory, but it has returned to Chinese sovereignty. It was independent for 99 years, and you know that actually the Opium Wars of 1839 and a few years going forward, where the British captured Hong Kong, and the humiliation that the British capture of Hong Kong, and where they signed a treaty that Britain will take Hong Kong for 100 years, we know that that humiliation is one of the reasons that gave rise to the Chinese worldview of the rise of China. We will rise. We have a chip on our shoulder. We will not be humiliated again in international affairs, the way the British did when we lost the Opium War. We will become a world power and overtake the British. So just speaking about Hong Kong, it's important to understand how Hong Kong plays in the psychology of China. So that lease is over, and China is now a part of Hong Kong, albeit under special terms, you know, that it will pursue a capitalist economy and so on and so forth. So it could be a third party beneficiary from this contract, but like I said, I'm not very clear of the details of that. Somebody said, what should citizens do? The problem we have in Nigeria is that we don't hold our governments accountable as citizens. I remind you that in the early 1960s, there was a pact that the Nigerian government signed with, I think it was the British government, yeah, on something to do with some military base or something.
Defense agreement.
Yes, but Nigerians rose up in the 1960s and protested against that agreement. So people were even more aware then than today. Today, a lot of things are happening and our citizens have been suppressed. They have been cowed into silence. And that's largely because of the economic problems that people are facing. So they focus on, you know, on just their livelihood. Some people focus on watching BB Niger to just pass away the time and get a lot of entertainment to drown their sorrows, you know. So we are in a state of anomie, no question about it. So it appears that the power of the people to stand up for their rights, when Aba women protested as far back as how many decades ago. It seems that that power is going lower and lower and lower and becoming smaller and smaller. That's a shame that as time passes in Nigeria, the citizens become weaker and weaker instead of becoming stronger and stronger. So, but I think the citizens should educate themselves and assert themselves. People always say, oh, the police will shoot us, the police will kill us. If 1 million people come out into the streets, let's just say, in a peaceful protest, peaceful, not violent, there's nothing the police can do about it because it is your right to protest, as we have seen with the Black Lives Matter, you know, and so on. So I think the citizens also disempower themselves and give themselves a lot of excuses. Contract inflation is a norm. How should it be fought? Of course it should be fought. I have proposed a strategy. When I ran in 2019, I gave out a clear way to fight corruption in Nigeria. And there are a number of plans, one of which is transparency about contracts. If a contract, if you maintain an electronic database of every item on the market, and you maintain it in an internet or some database, and it is constantly updated, and every contract is subjected to that database in terms of the pricing. And if the prices of any component are more than 30% of the current price, you know that there is mago-mago. You know that there is contract inflation going on. Now, of course, the contractor must make profit. That's why I give the 30% margin. The contractor is not an NGO. So we need to take this approach to fighting corruption. So it's a more preventive approach. Then, of course, there are issues of impartial accountability. There are issues of paying civil servants a proper living wage, and so on. And then there are issues of leadership. So fighting corruption is a complex issue, but accountability and transparency is a very important part of what we should bring to fighting corruption in order to reduce the inflation of contracts. Someone said 4-year term for re-election. Is it enough time? It's not a lot of time, I must tell you, but it's enough time for you to do some things, you know, but it depends on what you do. That's the issue. You cannot say that because you want to impress the electorate, you sell generations of Nigerians into debt slavery because you want to impress the electorate. No, that's not leadership. There are some things you can do. You can invest a lot more, for example, in social infrastructure, like healthcare, like education. And you can do that in a space of 2 to 3 years, and people can see some results. So I don't, even though I will say that we know that in many countries in Asia that have made a lot of progress, there was a lot of stability in the government. So the leaders lasted a long time, but they were visionary leaders like Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia. They could maintain a certain consistency of policy because those countries were not ideal democracies in those years. But we have chosen democracy and we must operate within its limitations. What can be done to stabilize Nigeria's political trajectory? I think there is one major thing there are 2 things that need to be done to stabilize the country's political trajectory. But the most important is what I referred to, the need for a new constitution for Nigeria, the need for constitutional restructuring to return Nigeria to a proper federal state. It's a very big country, and that's why it was designed as a federation when we gained independence. And regardless of the challenges, if it had not been for the unfortunate military interventions, I think we would have matured more as a democracy. So I think we have to return to a proper federation so that different parts of the country can develop at their own pace, and there can be even competitive development. So constitutional restructuring, and then addressing issues of nation building, equity and justice. You know, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. If you allow any part of the country to feel that they're being marginalized or they're being subjugated, different kinds of agitations will arise, whether it's in the Niger Delta, whether it's in the Middle Belt, whether it's in the Southeast, you know, and these things draw away from the strength of a country. But that's because the leadership of the political elite has allowed this situation to develop. So it's a failure of leadership that we're suffering from. Do I think the loans that we've taken are viable? Obviously, from my presentation, you can see that I don't think so. So I don't think I'll dwell too much on that. Who says Nigeria can't seize Nigeria's assets like in Sri Lanka? Well, not in a direct way, they can't. They can only do it if that happens within the context of an arbitral award. So that is, the contract deflected that possibility only as an outcome of an arbitration, not as a direct possibility. So, but it is possible, you know, in a certain scenario that such a thing could happen if an arbitral award were given and could not be paid, for example. So then deregulation. I believe that we should not only privatize, but we should deregulate. And the telecom industry certainly is a very good example of what we can achieve in our economy if we privatize and deregulate. You know, so, and that's a big achievement. I think that was recorded under the era of Olusegun Obasanjo. Many institutions were created in that era. A lot of economic reforms were undertaken, including, by the way, a cancellation of Nigeria's foreign debt of about $30 billion, $18 billion repaid, $12 billion canceled. So, you know, we know that that was a very huge achievement. And now we are back to a debt crisis again, which is a little bit disappointing. Now, presidential or parliamentary system. Well, it's an ongoing debate. The presidential system has its advantages, a bit more stable, but very expensive. And we have not run it with the maturity with which some other countries have run it. Now, there are different variations of a presidential system that we could still use, like in France, where you have a president and a prime minister, you know, and there's a certain type of division of powers. The president having more powers, but the prime minister kind of managing the government on a day-to-day basis. We could also look at that model. Now, a parliamentary government is cheaper to run, because everything happens in small localities and then they send their members of parliament to the center. And that's a very good system, but the problem with it is that it has a potential for instability, of frequent governments resigning, and, you know, so we should always bear things in mind and not jump from frying pan to the fire. If we reform the presidential system properly in a new constitution, we can still get what we want and what we need. Failed state. I think that is a very interesting question. Is Nigeria a failed state? Now, let me answer that question very honestly. Nigeria is a distressed state. That's clear to me. Has it failed completely? I wouldn't say so. But is it on track to fail if some fundamental changes are not made? I think that seems to be the case. You know, so I even saw this morning that some Wikipedia had sort of added Nigeria to its list of failed states. But you know, you can question that designation. But I think clearly Nigeria is distressed. There's no doubt about it. It's politically distressed. It's economically distressed. It's foundationally distressed. So it's all about our political will to come together and discuss the terms of the Nigerian Union and how it can work for every part of the country. We should not make any assumptions. People who talk about, oh, one Nigeria, one indivisible, one indissoluble union, they should be aware of history. That there are many countries that started out as one entity, but did not remain so. Yugoslavia, Soviet Union, India and Pakistan, Czechoslovakia, Czech and Slovakia. So many countries, there's no inevitability, but in many of these cases, some it happens through war. In the case of Slovakia and Czechoslovakia, it was a peaceful division. Nigerians should be honest with themselves and decide if they want to really be a nation and not just a country in name. That has always been my argument. I think we could be a very powerful, big, and strong country as Nigeria, but we have to have a soul. And that means that we have to have a common purpose and a common vision of the future for all of us, something that rises above the level of the things that divide us. That's a challenge of leadership that we need to meet. But we should be painfully aware of what the consequences could be if we fail to do so, and stop deluding ourselves. So I think I've touched on every question. Yeah, thank you.
Wow, Prof, we can spend the whole night listening to you. And I must say, this topic and your presence has generated one of the most excitements I have observed in this program. There are still many questions being asked. There are still many hands being raised. And unfortunately, we cannot take any more questions. We thought this would last for only 45 minutes, but we have now stayed here for more than 70 minutes, unfortunately. So what we can do is, there are so many comments here, Prof, but I cannot read up, but let me just read one before you go. Emmanuel Osai, Moyo said, he's still raising up his hand, but unfortunately we cannot take any more hand. He said, in my humble opinion, being referred to as Prof doesn't do you justice because of the disconnect between the university and the industry. Professors are people who just lecture and write papers that gather dust. So only you, Prof, doesn't do you justice. And finally, he suggested, I will not read all, he said, will you consider dropping that title? Because what you have said is far removed from the classroom. This is practical.
Well, I want to tell you that in 2015, I was appointed a professor of practice in public policy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Now, in academia, there is, especially in the United States, there's the theoretical professor and there is the professor of practice. The professor of practice is somebody who has established a track record of leadership and so brings that experience together with intellectual knowledge together into a classroom. So I was a professor of practice. If that is any consolation to you, I'm not just some theoretician. Yeah, thank you.
I thank you very much.
I mean, you can call me Kingsley Morel. I'm not hung up on any title. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'll call you Prof. Thank you very much. It's been a very wonderful engagement. And I hope, in fact, my questions about the economy, I cannot ask them again because of the multitude of questions coming up. I hope you will please give us another opportunity to have you on this platform to ask our numerous questions, because one of the disappointing things about Nigeria is that the citizens have a lot of questions and they have nobody to answer those questions. The government is not able to answer those questions. If I invite a minister to be on the platform, they always give one excuse or the other to appear. And they have no press conferences from the president, no press conference from the vice president, no press conference from the prime minister. People are asking questions and nobody answering them. So please, once again, we thank you very much for honoring our invitation. And it's been a very wonderful evening.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was very nice to interact with everybody. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay. So I can leave now, I hope.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you.